Security cameras surround us in our public lives, on street corners, in shops and schools, and they inspire wildly different reactions. Do we gain safety by losing privacy? And how do we measure the payoff? Surveillance and safety, this week on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
I'm Ted Williams. Joining me today are professors Linda Murphy from Wilbur Wright College, Richard Battrich from Wilbur Wright College, and Pamela Canamaray from Kennedy King College. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are talking about security cameras and surveillance and whether they contribute to safety or whether they're just sort of a false promise. Before we really dive into our conversation today, let's talk about what the city of Chicago is doing in this way. Is this something that citizens ought to really be aware about? Is the city really moving towards using more of these cameras, or have they found the cameras that they have to be sufficient enough? I hear and read that we are looking towards more, but I'd like to speak to that issue first.
Well, I've read that they are talking about installing more cameras, that they've already spent anywhere from $48 million to $60 million with the existing cameras that we have. My only concern is the cameras that we have now, are they being used wisely?
Okay, and we will definitely get to that, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Let's step back a little bit, though, and ask again, so we're using more cameras, we know this, but the cameras primarily they serve a few functions. So number one, we're dealing with traffic violations is one of the major reasons. We're obviously dealing with crime. Are there any other reasons, or is it just overall security, or is there something else that we're looking at here?
Well, it's security, it's crowd control, measuring crowds, public safety.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So here's a question: how effective are they? That's the question that I want to.
It depends on what question you're asking.
Okay.
Are they effective at preventing crime? There's not a lot of evidence that they are.
Okay.
Are they effective at solving crime? They can be.
Okay.
And that's kind of dependent on, are they being monitored?
Okay.
And that's a manpower question. Secondly, quality of the camera and the video. Is the camera operating?
Okay.
Where is the camera focused? Also, often you need corroborating testimony about who is involved in the incident. So if you can't get that, the videotape alone is not sufficient. So I think all of those factors play a role.
Why don't you give me an example? I know you have.
Well, you have a lot of different types of cameras that are tied in to the Chicago Police Department. You have cameras aboard the CTA, buses and Ls. That video can be retrieved. You have cameras, you have the blue light cameras that you see up on the posts that are fixed in certain areas. That video can be used and retrieved. You have cameras in the squad cars themselves now. That video can be used and retrieved. You have private citizens, merchants. You have cameras in most stores now. You have cameras outside the stores covering the parking lots.
So it's really not just an issue of sort of the government attempting to have surveillance on citizens. It's actually really, if you're talking about being in squad cars, is really a protection for citizens as well, correct? Yeah.
I think so.
So we think about, okay, so in a city like Chicago, and I have to go ahead and I shouldn't probably say this on TV, but I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I'm one of those people that has gotten caught by the traffic lights
we all have
pretty often.
I have not.
And I get those, and I hope and pray that you do not. So, but I've gotten a few of those in the mail, and I get, obviously very upset. And they're pretty accurate for the most part, although I will say that I did have one time where there was, sort of a turn on red that there was no sign for, and we kind of, fought it. But are citizens okay with this? Because there are a lot of questions about civil liberties. There are a lot of questions about whether this is an invasion of privacy. And I know, Linda, you talked a little bit about the Fourth Amendment.
Well, I think citizens are highly irritated with it because it's purely a revenue generator, I think. Although Rick did tell me that sometimes, occasionally, those red light cameras are actually useful in catching people speeding away from crime, and they're able to take a picture of the plate.
We had a situation with a drive-by shooting, and the vehicle took off at a high rate of speed, and it went through a red light, and the red light camera captured the license plate, which led us to the shooter.
Which is a great example. Go ahead.
But civil liberties, going back to civil liberties, definitely an interesting issue with a red light camera, and it is different than the issue with a standard camera, like a blue light camera.
Okay.
With a red light camera, there's a serious question about who is in the car. So the car is the violator.
Gotcha.
You cannot identify who is the driver. So that's a real issue, and I think that if that ever gets to a real federal court that's going to look at that, you could see those cameras, a problem with using that evidence.
Now, Richard, you mentioned that there were questions about whether evidence was permissible, or when you said, like, if you basically had a situation where an image was enhanced, that potentially was not, we couldn't use it in a court?
Anytime you have digital photography or digital video, and you have to enhance, change, or alter something that was the original, you've actually altered evidence, and that's a difficult piece of evidence to try and get admitted into the case. It can, however, be used. What they do is you will keep the original, inventory the original, and send it through. You will work off a copy, and that will perhaps give you some information you didn't have before. It's a tool that you're using, and perhaps that can point you towards the offender or the person that you're looking for.
Okay.
And then you have to obviously alter your investigation, because that alone isn't going to be sufficient. You're going to have to come up with some things, but at least you have a starting point.
Okay. So in a typical situation, say with the blue light cameras, where you have someone that has committed some crime, and you get a picture of their image, but the camera, I'm assuming, is not close enough to necessarily identify faces. And then you're saying that if then that image is enhanced and we bring that in, then potentially that evidence we can't use in court because of the manipulation of it.
There have been challenges to that effect, yes. Okay. Anytime you alter an original recording or an original image, because we've all seen what can be done with technology.
Absolutely.
You can crop my head and put it on your shoulders.
Absolutely.
And vice versa.
Absolutely.
So you have to be careful with that type of thing. Our blue light cameras, sometimes they do capture very distinct images, sometimes they don't. Those we are able to bring up at our various centers. We're able to look at, detectives have access to view some of those, and we found that when you show somebody their own picture on camera,
it's hard for them to fight, huh?
You may not be able to recognize that face, you and I, but he knows that's him, and they want to. Quite often, they'll give it up at that point.
Wow, that's actually a very effective point.
Pamela,
you you had some concerns as well that we were talking about earlier, and I'd like to hear what.
I do have some concerns about having the blue light cameras in certain neighborhoods, because I feel that it devalues the community. I feel the insurance rates go up because it's saying it is a visual that this neighborhood has some issues.
Sure.
There's crime going on, and we want to monitor what's going on. Whether or not it really deters crime, the criminals, they don't have to be within the range of the camera, or maybe they think it's not manned because we're assuming there are people behind the cameras watching and monitoring what's going on. Some of the other things, the information is being recorded. Is it a loop? Is it stored somewhere? Also, cameras have to be upgraded. I mean, with television, we just went to HD TV, and that was a tremendous expense, even for Channel 20 here at WYCC. So is it a placebo? Do cameras just give us a false sense of safety?
That's an excellent question. What do you all think?
I don't think, I think for the money, you're not getting what you're paying for right now. London has 200,000 cameras. For each camera,
it's up to 500,000 now.
Is it up to 500,000?
It's up to 500,000 cameras.
It's about one solved crime per year per 1,000 cameras. Oh. Okay. But they're very saturated in London. We don't have near the number of cameras here. But it's what are you catching? You know, I mean, when the payoff is one of those cameras is going to catch something important like the 2005 terrorist attack on the trains in London was caught on videotape. The guys, the perpetrators were caught. So people are going to think, then it's definitely worth the money. It's really, is it worth the money?
But think about this, and you're a criminal justice professor. I teach political science, and so, you know, we're obviously in the same world. People, whether your number, Linda, was very real and important and very impressive in terms of the fact that we know we have hard data that says that it's not working the same level that we want. But the reality is, politically and otherwise, that I don't think that really matters to people.
I agree.
Because when you look at sort of criminal justice in and of itself, in so many ways we are reactionary. So we want the perception that crime is down because we throw people in jail and we think that that makes us safer. Now, I'm not necessarily saying either way whether it is or not, but I do think that even though your numbers are real and true, I don't think at the end of the day it really matters, because I think people still feel safer. And if you look at London, most cities are going that way. I've got a relative that is an alderman in one of the south suburbs, and I just had a conversation with him recently about how this south suburb had really not had much crime for years. And in the past 5 years, they've had more murders than they've ever had, et cetera. And the first thing that they're doing is they're getting more cameras. And so whether you throw up numbers that say, hey, this is not effective or not, at the end of the day, people still, they feel safer for some reason.
Well, I mean, I can understand that just the presence of a camera can possibly deter some crimes. There are vendors and some shop owners that'll put up the camera and it's not attached to anything.
And that's the thing that we can't quantify. We can't quantify whether it deters crime or not, because we can't quantify if someone walks into a place they were going to commit a crime and they see a camera and they leave.
If it's used properly, though, it can be a proactive tool. It's not just reactionary if it's used properly. Now, the example you just gave about, and it's quite common, some people don't even put film in them or even bother. They just, you know, it's
I've
the,
seen that too, yeah.
you know, just the camera so everybody sees it, and it's going to keep the honest people honest.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop the actual thief. It's just going to warn him, so to speak. But if it's used properly, it can be a proactive tool.
Sure.
But then again, you know, you start bumping heads with the civil liberties people on the Fourth Amendment and right to privacy issues, depending how you use that camera and, more importantly, where you use it.
Because it seems countercultural in America, with all the constitutional rights that we have, that we would live in essentially a police state where every time you walked into a public setting, you were being videotaped. That to me is extremely problematic. And although we're headed that way, you'd mentioned a couple cases, a couple lawsuits that have occurred around this issue. I'd like for you to speak a little bit to some of that, because there have been some constitutional issues around the Fourth Amendment.
Well, there have, but I don't think that there have been enough that we could say there's been, you know, lower court cases, but differences. So I don't think we have. I think it's going to take quite a while for this to move through the system until we get some kind of definitive answer. And I doubt very much that the federal courts will limit the presence of the cameras. They may limit who can access the data and what it can be accessed for. Because none of us want people to be videotaped if they're going to a political meeting. None of us want people videotaped if they're going to a psychiatrist. None of us wants this. Is the potential for abuse there? It absolutely is. Is it getting bigger every day? It is. The more cameras there are. Is there much legislation or regulation at the moment on this? No. But legislation usually follows.
It does.
The courts follow what happens. So I think we're going to see it coming.
Well, now Jane and John Doe can be reality TV 24/7.
You just read my mind. You read my mind. I was just thinking about that.